All right, for all you Malermaniacs out there, today we are going to talk about Josh Malerman's new book, Spin a Black Yarn. I feel like most people have heard of Josh Malerman at this point in time. If you like horror books, if you haven't, one of my favorite authors. He has so many great books that are out, and this is the newest one, and it's 5 novellas that are in one book. And I'm going to talk a little bit about each story, just a little blurb, a little soundbite, nothing too much, just so you know kind of what you're getting into. And the first story is called Half the House is Haunted. And it starts out and it follows this brother and sister that are really young. And the sister's kind of like, seems like this neurotic, almost crazy spaz, like telling her brother like half the house is haunted and like freaking him out and messing with him like an older sister should, right? Or maybe not so much, because maybe she's kind of traumatizing this guy for the rest of his life. I don't know, you know, which half of the house is haunted? Could it be every other step? Is it the top half, the bottom half? Is it one side of the walls or the other side of the walls? Kind of not just like the typical like, oh, it's split down the middle. This half is haunted and this half isn't. Maybe it's just the basement. Maybe the kitchen is and this bedroom isn't, but maybe this bedroom is haunted. And it's seriously like the beginning of the story was so like neurotic and spastic, like how it was written. I didn't know if I liked it. It follows them as they get older and their relationship, and then the ending of the story was really touching and beautiful, and that's what kind of took the black yarn and spun it and cemented it for me. And this is the first thread of the tapestry that is this book, and I thought the first story was pretty great. So I like that when I go into a story and I'm kind of on like shaky footing and I'm like, maybe I'm not gonna like this, you know, because they always have maybe that thought. It's a possibility. I can't love everything that Josh Malerman writes, right? So far I have, but this one did not fail me. So then you get to the second story, and it's called Argyle, and it's about a serial killer who has never killed. And to even wrap your brain around how that story would go, like try and think about that. You're like, what do you mean a serial killer that has never killed? Well, it's portrayed pretty dang good. It is exactly as it sounds. Once you read it, you'll be like, oh, okay. And then also the ending of that one was also really freaking good. Awesome. And then the third story, which I think is my favorite, and it's called Doug and Judy by the Housewasher. I was judging it by the title. I was like, oh, this is probably gonna be like campy or whatever. It was my absolute favorite story. They're this rich couple and they're kind of jerks, and they get this really expensive house washer that like washes everything they own. What happens is, I don't know what I even expected was gonna happen, but it's really sadly beautiful, and you get kind of an insight of what they used to be like, and maybe they weren't always as horrible as they are now. And that's all I'll say about that one. But that was my absolute favorite one, which was surprising to me. I don't know. I mean, I didn't know anything about any of these stories, so how would I even know? I'm just judging by titles, right? And I was like, that one just sounds like it would be campy and goofy, but it was really like so much more in depth than I ever imagined it would be. And then the next story is called The Jupiter Drop, and it's this story of this guy who decides he's gonna go to Jupiter, and it's this crazy thing where you're in this apartment and it's all glass and you can see everything, and they just drop you into the atmosphere of Jupiter and you just go experience Jupiter for, I don't remember, it's like several months or something. And if you think anything out there is alive, it isn't. There's nothing there. Nothing can survive on Jupiter. And that story is kind of like, that was more of like sci-fi with a little hint of horror. And then the last story is about these triplets, and one of the triplets ends up being murdered by this old rich man. The 2 remaining of the triplets decide to exact their revenge by haunting this guy and making him go crazy. That was a story that, for me, it took me a little bit to get into it, but I thought that one was pretty fantastic and really well done. Overall, I like this book quite a bit. My favorite story was Doug and Judy by the Housewasher. And if you do end up reading this, I would love to know what your favorite story in it is as well. Everyone has such different tastes when you read books. I'm always curious to see like when it's short stories, what your favorite is. I think the first 3 I like the best. So the third story is my favorite. I think it would go 3, 1, 2, 5, and then 4. In that order. Another excellent Josh Malerman book. Spin a Black Yarn weaves all the threads together. Oh, and they all also take place in the town of Samhatten, which is where Daphne took place. And Daphne is mentioned also in one of the stories. And there's that tie-in, and Goblin is also mentioned. And I like how Malerman is like creating that whole world and towns that are kind of interconnected across his books. I always think that's kind of cool when an author does that. Like, it's pretty neat. And then he also has an afterword in the book that kind of like gives you a bit more insight into some of the behind the scenes stuff, which I love. Like, usually you get in books, people have their acknowledgments and thank yous, but Malerman, like in some of his books, he goes more into depth about like what was behind some of the stories and what's to come and all that, and I freaking love that. I love when authors do that. So if you're a fan of horror books with short stories, the next video coming up will be another video about that. So stick around, check it out. And if you had fun hanging out today, hit that subscribe button, come back, see me again, and we'll talk about more bookish things and weird stuff.